Today, we are going to discuss the previous lesson about cropping calendar. The following image is the Integrated Cropping Calendar Information System version 3.3 published by the Ministry of Agriculture. The key questions here are how to use weather or climate data, what data is used for, and who will use it. The climate data should always be connected with user so that it can really work out for adaptation and mitigation processes. We firstly introduce how climate change affects the agricultural sector since the beginning of the rainy seasons, changes in harvest time, planting patterns, and the area that can be planted by profitable crops. The effects of climate change are the change of temperature and rainfall pattern, which results in changes of growing season, increase in the number of pests and diseases, changes of carbon dioxide emission in the atmosphere. It also affects the availability of water and ultimately affects the biodiversity on Earth. Now we must pay attention to climate and weather information. Basically, plants need solar radiation, water, carbon dioxide, nutrients, soil temperature, and wind. These factors affect plant growth and development that contribute to the plant productivity. Another alternative to utilizing weather information is to use cropping calendar. Cropping calendar is the alternative for adaptation and mitigation, so that the agriculture sector would be more efficient and effective. It consists of three components, namely weather, crop rotation, and weather information, obtained from meteorological and geophysical agencies. The temperature, precipitation throughout the day, and so on. In this case, we will also determine what plants that are adaptive to these weather conditions. The type of plants to be cultivated related to specific locations is preferred. Those kind of things we need to take into considerations to determine planting calendar. Then, the second is what is the condition of the soil. So there is an interaction between weather, soil, and plants. Every region certainly has information about fertility, nutrient content, soil pH, and other factors that affect plant growth. We can also determine what types of plants can be planted, so different types of soil consider a particular type of plant, which would grow on it. We would do crop rotation if the weather information received is extreme. Then we will choose what plants are most suitable for these extreme conditions. It means we will rotate plants from each region according to local weather conditions. This would help us to select the crop types. This also would help how the biotic and abiotic environment will support growth, development, eventually resulting in productivity. Cropping calendar is dynamic because it's well adjusted to conditions of local weather. It's also operational and it's depending on location. Differences in location will cause differences in information issued. It's also integrated because the information from cropping calendar is also related to how much fertilizer will be applied, how many seeds needed, pests and diseases controlling, as well as agricultural tools or machinery needed in where we will cultivate the commodities. Planting calendar is also updated per 8 days by the Ministry of Agriculture, so it's worth using. What we get from making the first planting calendar is that we can start cultivate in the most appropriate planting time. Indeed, it's adjusted to rainfall condition. The rainy season occurs in October to March. For example, in our region in North Sumatra, the planting season we define is from October to March. The alternative is if we choose rice plants, then to distinguish the planting pattern, for example in 1 year, either it can be rice and rice or rice and secondary crops or so on. and the technology recommendation resulted can estimate the potential of the crop production we plant, reduce the risk of losses due to improper planting time, failure in growth due to pest attacks and environmental stress, and so on will be eliminated if we use the planting calendar. Information we can get from using the planting calendar is we can see prediction or forecast when is the beginning of the rainy season. Eventually we can estimate the planting time that is suitable for rice crops. Why is it our main crop? Because rice is a staple food in Indonesia rather than other crops such as corn, soybean, peanut, and so on. In the cropping calendar, we can also see the planting pattern, the potential production from the cultivation we do, then the prediction of environmental stress, pests and disease outbreaks or others. In the cropping calendar also listed recommendation of seeds needed, varieties used, and how to manage the field production, fertilizer recommendation, selection of secondary crops, machinery tools used in managing field production. Until 2022, we can get the information of cropping calendar through the online integrated site like litbang.go.id and so on. But in 2023, the Ministry of Agriculture is making improvements, but we can still access it through the website. But the perfect one is still the website which had been launched till 2022. So now in this updating time, this is the display of the latest planting calendar. There are three options, namely Katam for wetlands, drylands still ongoing version 1.0, and for swampland version 1.0. So the most feasible and most perfect among the three, that is the paddy fields Katam for wetlands. The initial stage of planting is based on rainfall conditions and the variability of rainfall in Indonesia. So if we can see that, North Sumatra is bimodal. The most recommended crops are rice and oil palms. If it's tropical fruit and rubber for the local wet area and the plant is also oil palm, it means that the differences in rainfall patterns will cause differences in the crops to be planted. So if we are here in North Sumatra, some alternative plants are oil palms. This is the reason why Indonesian palm oil productivity is fairly high compared to other countries, as we know that this oil palm requires more water compared to other plantation commodity. This is how our adaptation pattern makes planting pattern from rainfall information. The beginning of rainy season is from September to August. The pattern that is green, then the red one is the beginning of the rainy season. Therefore, this rainfall pattern will produce a red planting calendar time pattern that can only be planted from December to March. It's go-go rice, or after it, we plant secondary crops. It means rice plants is not recommended to be planted. But for the second cropping pattern, we will see that we can plant it all year round. Rice and rice pattern. And the third pattern is similar from the beginning. We plant rice and secondary crops. The conclusion is planting culture depends on rainfall rate. How planting patterns different to rainfall rate will cause differences in cultivated plants, differences in crop rotation, differences in facilities and machinery needed, and differences in tools to be used. This is the display of the integrated cropping calendar website system version 2.7. This is the link address of the site. This is the content of cropping calendar system. Then this is how to enter the validity from April to September. Then this is the social media that can take information from integrated Katam via cell phone or laptop. This can also be an example of calendar map of rice planting in Binjai City, North Sumatra Province. So there is a planting season. Let's say if we look at this, there are 19 planting time to plant, and also on the planting calendar also produce a recapitulation of how much can be planted in certain areas. In this example of a location in Binjai, which is divided into 5 districts, namely South Binjai, Binjai City, East Binjai, North Binjai, and West Binjai. This administrative index, and this is area for rice fields that can be cultivated. And this is the planting time. So if we plant in South Binjai from November to December, as well as Binjai City and East Binjai, but for North Binjai, we can only plant it starting from November. If in West Binjai, it can be from November to December. Then in the second planting season, South Binjai is light fallow, Binjai City is light fallow, seeds couldn't be planted. East is also like that, but North Binjai could plant new seeds. So in March, the second planting season could only be planted was North Binjai with an area of 554 hectares. Then how is the planting season in 2022 from April to September? Binjai City could not. West Binjai only lies 10 hectares. In the first planting time, July. North Binjai could not in July but September. So South Binjai, Binjai City, East Binjai, and West Binjai could start planting in July. But for North Binjai, it cannot be planted in July. It must be in September depending on the amount of rainfall. Then, how is the recapitulation of secondary crop plants? As we saw previously, the recapitulation of rice then is for secondary crops. So for South Binjai, there are about 500 rice fields that can be planted accordingly from October to March, and the second one was empty. But for North Binjai, we can plant rice from April to September 2022. Then what is growing season? What is the nature of the rain? If we look at the nature of the rain in Binjai, it's under normal conditions. The average rainfall is 196 millimeters. So if we convert to water requirements on rice, it needs around 180 to 200 millimeters. It means we can give recommendations to do rice planting. This for secondary crop commodities. Because of their high rainfall rate, it is not recommended to plant these crops because if corn is planted, which is a C4 metabolism plant, it doesn't need much water. It will damage the corn plant itself. Then how the agro-ecosystem of the rice field? For example, for planting season in the first year, then the second year, and then the next year. So we can conclude that the beginning of planting is at the beginning of October to March. We can plant rice, then let it fallow. North Binjai can plant rice in the other areas light fallow. This is an estimate of the plant damage level. For example, flood is relatively in safe conditions, drought stress is relatively low, and the brown plant hopper rate is relatively safe. The extent of this crop damage will give an indication of how farmers manage their production fields, whether the use of pesticides is needed or mechanically sufficient. This is an estimate of the area of crop damage. It's still relatively low. This is a variety recommendation for rice, such as in Pari 11, in Pari 12 varieties. Farmers or users may choose several varieties to be planted based on their preferences. Some people prefer pera or drier rice, or kulen or fluffier rice, or with a long harvesting time or short harvesting time, or ganja. This is the option of varieties that can be used. This is susceptibility information. The variety recommendation is what crops to be planted. So in general, the relative degree of damage is safe. Relatively safe varieties can be used for corn or soybean. There are palaka, tropic, and so on. And then this is an estimate of the growing season for 2022. So if the flood would be safe, drought would be relatively safe. So if this is for soybeans, varieties the recommended is Burangrang, Anjasmuro, Agromulyo, Ijen, and so on. This is the useful fertilizer recommendation. We already know the weather, soil fertility information. Then we continue to fertilizer. If it's a single fertilizer, then the recommended fertilizer are urea 350, 75, and 50. For West Binjai, the dosage of urea are 350, 75, and 50. Both are different for rice fields. For corn, if we use a single fertilizer or compound fertilizer. For soybean, if we use single fertilizer or compound fertilizer. It means that both user and farmer can already choose if he wants to plan what fertilizer recommended to use. If single fertilizer used here is the dose, if compound fertilizer used here is the dose. This is the example of the required seeds data from South Binjai, Binjai City, East Binjai, North Binjai, and West Binjai. The available varieties are Ciherang and Mekonga. Then the recommendation of rice, corn, and soybean depends on the recommendation viewed from the recommendation variety information. We already get information of soil condition, weather. Then we will see a description of the plants to be cultivated. This is an example of a standing crop map June 30, 2021 in East Binjai. These are some plant growth phase distribution map. The prediction of the harvest had been estimated in June 2021. We had 19 hectares. In July 2021, we had 11 hectares. And in August 2021, we had about 68 hectares. By the information of the standing crop, we can see and determine that the agribusiness players can predict the price range related to crop yields per period per regional unit. We can conclude that climatic condition in North Sumatra divided into 4, namely B1, C1, D1, and E2. B1, where the wet month is over 7 to 9 consecutive months, while the dry months is less than 2 months. C1, wet months is 5 to 6 consecutive months, and the dry months is less than 2 months, while D1, wet months has over 3 to 4 consecutive months, the dry months is less than 2 months, and then E2, the wet months is less than 3 months and the dry months has 2 to 4 months. Thank you for your attention.